Hey, deserving listeners, 90 Day Fiancé, bears all. Let's watch.
Okay, all right, let's go.
No one is good enough for him, and we will always live together.
All right, so on Bears All, Andrei and Elizabeth Libby are playing a game in which they have these names of other cast members and the other partners trying to help out. So Libby's trying to give hints to Andrei about, names. So Debbie and her description, whether or not she, sometimes people take shortcuts in these kinds of games. But that is one of the conceptualizations as to what's going on inside of Debbie, that no one is good enough for my cult, and you and I are going to live together forever. I don't know if that's fair. I think, one, that Debbie doesn't have anyone else. She only has Colt, I think. And that's not Colt's fault, of course. But I think imagine for y'all out there, you have one person in your life. Maybe it's your son, maybe it's your partner, maybe it's your parent, whatever, your cat. If you have one person and that person is potentially going to move out, you're going to have a lot of feelings about that. Two, Debbie was, I think, rational and differentiated about it, that she's like, well, if he moves out, it'll be sad for me, but he's a grown man and it's going to happen eventually. She was sad about it. The other thing that we can point toward is that with Larissa, Colt's relationship with Larissa was volatile, and Debbie would be a bad family member if she didn't say, I don't know if this is the best relationship for you. Now, Debbie didn't have the best take on it. She would blame Larissa instead of just going, I think the two of you don't really fit well together. You're fighting a lot. So that's what I would say about Debbie. I think the internet is fairly mean to her. I think there are things you could absolutely criticize, like when she was seemingly scheming against Jess by having Vanessa stay. There was a whole thing there where I was like, whoa, I didn't know Debbie was capable of that kind of premeditated hostility, unfair hostility, really. So there's things you can criticize in Debbie, but I don't think the general discourse around her, like she's controlling Colt or, won't let him leave the house and all that kind of stuff. I don't think that's so fair.
They decided, let's just cancel Charlie out of the family, which means myself and our 4 kids as well.
It's not true, but...
You were my best friend for 24 years.
Megan.
And you stopped talking to me.
Megan.
Did you give me an...
All right, so I think this Bears All episode has occurred after the last season of Happily Ever After the tell-all. And at this point, Charlie and Megan have been canceled from the family. And now they're having them back on to discuss this. And Megan is being hostile. She, I think, is hurt that, and I didn't know that she was friends with Jen for 24 years. I think maybe even friends with Jen before Megan was with Charlie. So I think Megan is in a tough position because what it looks like is Charlie is having some sort of issue, either personal and or relational, with his family, and Megan is in the middle, and she has chosen to stick by her husband, which we could imagine would be a good move. And this is interesting. Megan used that word canceled again, which I just have to say, there's a certain echo chamber, a large echo chamber in our country right now that is, cancel culture has its pros and its cons, as everything in our culture does. And the con is that some people can be consequenced in a way that is unfair. They make a small mistake, or there's a misinterpretation of what happened to them, and they get canceled in a wrong-headed manner. I think that's rare. The pro to cancel culture is that racists and misogynists and sexists and ableists and fat shamers and ageists and all sorts of people who have been getting away with oppression as a system and as individuals for decades, if not centuries, are finally being called out for their behavior and experiencing consequences thereof, which is justice. So to just label all of it as this, snowflake liberal cancel culture ridiculousness is completely wrongheaded. We have to take it case by case basis, including what is happening to Charlie, that he feels canceled. That's his, because in his echo chamber, I'm imagining to be canceled is to be ridiculously rejected in a baseless, foundationless way. And but what's happening, we don't know. The history between Charlie and his family, I think that they have problems with Charlie that they're not talking about. There's speculation about cocaine use and alcohol use as the problem could be, but we don't know. There's so little to go off of. Maybe they'll get into it.
No, you didn't. I texted you after he made my kids cry at a family barbecue, and I said, I'm not going to be around Charlie anymore. I don't want my girls around Charlie.
Okay, so you were best friends with Megan for 24
I still
years.
care a lot about her, and that's one of the reasons I distanced myself, because I can't be around that and witness it.
Not true.
It brings too much.
So there's language there from Jen about substance addiction. You'll hear people, and I don't know if Jen is speaking that way, but we use this as a jumping off point, that when you have a family member or a friend who is suffering from a compulsive disorder, addiction, they'll be harming themselves. And if you're close to them, you'll often, by collateral damage, be harmed. And one of the strategies of self-preservation is to distance yourself in a really sad, you're sad about it. You're like, I don't want to distance myself from my brother, but I need to in order to protect me and my family, because that person, their addiction, their substance use problem is so out of control, and they're not in control of their substance use in their life either. And by definition, the closer I get, the more out of control and unmanageable my life becomes. And so I don't know if that's what Jen is talking about.
You would tell me it's not true when I'm fucking sitting here saying how I feel. You're going to tell me that I feel isn't true?
Yes.
No, you don't get to do that. Sorry.
Okay.
So this is a common thing that we see in the world, I guess, and on the show, that they'll say, that's how I feel. You're going to tell me that what I feel isn't true. And often what people are saying is, if Jen said, look, I don't know if I'm right or wrong, but when my kids are around you and Charlie, I get worried about my kids. Megan couldn't argue with that legitimately, but that isn't what Jen said. What Jen said is there's something definitely wrong with you, and maybe there is, but that's more debatable. And that's why when you're in conversations like that, you want to stick to a differentiated ownership of your own feelings, because that's all you can really state. You can only say, I don't know if I'm right or wrong, but here's how I feel. I feel afraid when I'm around Charlie. I feel afraid when my kids are around Charlie, and I'm worried about Charlie. I'm worried about you, Megan. I'm worried about your kids. I'm worried about my kids. And it just feels better to me if we're just separating. That's ownership of your own feelings. That's stating facts. You do know that you are worried. No one can debate that with you. And if they do, you can say something like, I'm just telling you how I feel. You can't argue with me on that level. You could argue with me that maybe I'm misinterpreting something. That's okay. But people on the show and in the world, they tend not to be able to delineate those layers of how I feel versus how I'm interpreting things versus what I'm saying to another person. And it all just kind of gets lumped into, I'm just telling you how I feel, And it's just like, well, you're not just telling someone how you feel. You sometimes I would say 99% of the time when someone says, I'm just telling you how I feel, they said nothing about how they actually felt. In terms of their emotional state. Actually, let's rewind it, because maybe Jen did.
You didn't. I texted you after he made my kids cry at a family barbecue, and I said, I'm not going to be around Charlie anymore. I don't want my girls around Charlie.
Okay, so you were best friends with Megan for
I
24
still care a
years.
lot about her, and that's one of the reasons I distance myself because I can't be around that and witness it.
Not true.
It brings too much.
If
How are
she
you
was
gonna
a
tell
true-
me?
Okay, so Jen did. I think it falls under that category. It's not strictly in the category I'm talking about it, but I think Jen is legit, has a legitimate complaint here, and it does fit with what she's saying. Is I do, she said, I do genuinely care about Megan, and it does kind of bum me out that I have to distance myself from her because of Charlie. And then Megan says, that's not true. And Jen's like, what? Like, how can you tell me that I don't care about you? I do. Yeah. Now, maybe they'll pull out his nosedive.
It's not
Friend,
true. When I'm
she
fucking
would-
sitting here saying how I feel, you're going to tell me that
If
how
you-
I feel isn't true?
Yes.
No,
because
you don't get to do that. Sorry.
Okay. So are you
You
done?
don't have that power.
Are you done?
No, I'm not done.
I will say this sort of style of, we need a label for this. We don't have, do we have a label? Sometimes people say drama or something, but we need a label for this style of, it's a power play. People do this very frequently on this kind of show. I actually, the label that I sometimes will use is sort of a Jerry Springer style. I mean, it's not that bad because Jerry Springer, it would get really out of control, but it has that kind of vibe to it of I'm going to put on this, I don't know, this persona of power and of, I know what I'm talking about, and shut up, little person. And obviously people do this behind closed doors all the time. And I see it so often in the couples and families that I treat, and immediately I'll just say, this isn't working. Like, don't put your hand in someone's face, listen to each other. If, try, you're not even trying to understand. So when Jen said, which was a olive branch of some kind of, actually I care about Megan and da-da-da-da, and then Megan's like, no, and stomps on it. And then that hurts Jen because Jen extended herself and then got slapped back. And instead of saying, ow, that kind of hurts, I said I cared about you, and you're telling me that I don't. And but I do. I just want you to know. But instead, Jen gets hostile and starts to, get angry towards Megan. Megan starts to double down. Are you done? Are you done? Are you done? That kind of talk. It's like, you're not really having a conversation at that point. You're essentially having some kind of verbal slapping fight or boxing match. I don't know.
What was the breakdown? Because I remember, Elizabeth, in the beginning, when Andrei would talk about Charlie, you were very defensive of Charlie. You were, that was your brother. Please don't talk about my brother. When did the shift happen for you?
I think the spark of it was probably in Moldova when he made like an awful, embarrassing speech at our wedding.
It's interesting. So I'm appreciating, this Bears All show provides so much interesting context because Sean will ask these really great questions that they somehow don't have time for in the tell-all or something. Anyway, so Sean asks Libby, when did it sort of shift for you with Charlie? Because in the beginning you were kind of defending him, and then at a certain point you weren't. And Libby's saying, I think it was our wedding in Moldova when, my goodness, Charlie, yikes. I mean, the things that he said, and it was incredible. And like, there are things that happen on the show where it's like, ooh, yikes. That one really took the cake. The other thing that took the cake was when Angela took the cake and shoved it in Michael's, those things like that were just like, whoa. And I wonder if for Libby and maybe the rest of the family were becoming more and more concerned and hurt by Charlie's drinking, drug abuse, possibly, and his behavior and his attitude. One of the things that can happen to people, I don't know if this is true for Charlie, but I'll tell you about clients that I've worked with and family members of people I've worked with, is that you're suffering from something relational trauma-wise. You've been abandoned, or you have traumas, or you have rejection or something, and you low self-esteem. It's festering on the inside of you, and particularly if you're a man, because you're not supposed to ask for help. You don't know what to do, and you make fools out of yourself. But you start drinking and you start taking substances, and you're like, oh, I can relax, I can numb out. feel better about myself. But of course, when you impair your brain, you become more problematic and less able to manage your behavior. And then the next day you wake up and you have to somehow fit everything together. Part of you wants to say, let's give up substances, let's actually get help, but that's too scary. And so it's like, I'm going to double down on this lifestyle of drinking and drugging. And I'm just going to go into denial about the drinking and drugging, and I'm going to go into denial about my behavior. I'm just going to say, look, that's who I am. It is what it is. You know, you hear Charlie and Andrei say stuff like that. It is what it is. That's just how things are. You know, this kind of ridiculous, I've already said it, so therefore it's done. There's nothing, you know, that is how the world works. It's like vomiting out, you know, your lunch and saying like, I always wanted to do that. It is what it is. Yeah, of course, yes. I intended on vomiting all over the table. I don't know why I'm using that analogy, but that's just what popped into my head. Anyway, so you go into that mindset, and then you're distancing yourself from other people because you're getting lost more in your relational traumas. You're projective identificationing everyone around you and pushing them away, and you know, more and more distortions, more and more substances. And then you go to this wedding, and the hubris and the confidence at which Charlie was operating from when he was humiliating himself in front of the entire crowd by calling out Andrei. And of course, Chuck is sitting next to Charlie going, what are you doing? Knock it off. Charlie just seemed so sure of himself. I mean, the level of delusion, not, you know, schizophrenic level of delusion, but self-delusion that you have to go down to get to that point. And for Libby, she could just be like, whoa, I've been making, and this is what can happen. I don't know if this is true, but when you have someone who's suffering from an addiction in your family, in your life, that there's this tendency to make excuses in the beginning because you don't know what else to do. It's easier to make excuses than it is to actually face the hard truth. And families will do that, repeat, especially if that's a family rule that was established maybe even before Charlie. Maybe there's another person suffering from substance use in the family. Maybe it was Chuck in the past, maybe the mom, who knows. But if you've seen that before, you'll fall right back into that pattern. Excuse, 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 pain, 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 enabling, enabling, enabling. And then boom, something hits and you're like, what am I doing? Why am I making excuses for this person? Why am I, making it okay for this to happen? Like, I'm done. That's it. I'm at my wit's end. I can see it now that this family member has been going down a road of toxicity for years now, and I've just been acting like he's not. And I'm not going to do that anymore. I wonder if that's what happened to Libby.
And didn't really seem sorry about it towards me or my husband. It really hurt him, and we were tired of the disrespect.
When he did that shit in Moldova, like that's when it was like the cap. He was very lucky not to get his face fucking thrown in the ground over there.
Okay, so, all right, so there is...
Now, for Andrei, it's just a matter of his hurt and his, which is legit, I think, but also Andrei's, how do I put this? Masculine competition with Charlie that played a role there. All right, well, that does it for that episode. Everyone out there, please take care of yourself because you deserve it. You really, really do.